Hey folks, Paul Abernathy here. So a lot of people are asking me, so what happened with 250-122 for the 2026 edition of the NEC? Well, what's going to happen to it? I know that you were talking about the issue of paralleling equipment grounds and how they were reducing the size. Well, I was at the meeting and I presented my position, and I was told that I was not logical and that I was not following physics and all this kind of stuff without any substantiation, without any data, without any testing. We're just going to change the size of the equipment grounding conductor when we're running them in parallel in multiple raceways. Okay, I'm an educator, so either way, this looks like this is going to go forward because really there's not very many people that spoke out. So I was kind of shocked. But at the end of the day, the wire and cable manufacturers have spoke out. And of course, those people are going to say, well, of course they're going to speak out. They want the conductors to be larger because they make more money. Okay, whatever. The fact of the matter is, I don't like to see things changed without testing to substantiate something. I'm really getting tired of the code panels just putting in their own opinions and their logic, and not everybody agrees, but they don't want to buck the system because the people that submit it are very knowledgeable, but they don't, I have to see the data before we change stuff. Okay, so anyway, there was a redoing of most of the important parts of 250-122. Didn't do anything to the table itself in 250-122, but the parts that lead up to it and all the subdivisions and everything like that. So let's go look and see what was done for the 2026. Now, remember, there's still a NITMAM stage. There's still a voting. But in this case, I don't look for the vote to not pass, because if there was, they were sure quiet in the room. So I would say this is probably going to pass. So let's go look at it. All right, so here we got 250-122. This is what it looks like after the second draft. And I will show you some of the comments in the room, because I did at least get them to say some things in writing, okay? All right, so one of the big changes you're going to see is right here where there's now a 250-122, A and a B here. And of course, I don't know that this numbering is exactly correct, because sometimes things, Terra, which is the software that NFPA uses, can kind of murder some things. But we'll look at the gist of it. All right, so here's sizing the equipment grounding conductor, the EGC. It says copper, aluminum, or copper-clad aluminum equipment grounding conductors of the wire type shall not be smaller than shown in table 250-122 unless otherwise permitted by 250-122A through 250.122I. Okay, so we've got this list here. Now, A, it says not larger than the circuit conductors. So this is the one that I told you came up out of nowhere during the first draft. So I submitted something in order to, all I wanted to do was clarify that when it comes to circuit conductors, that when they're run in parallel, say you have 5 sets of 500 kc mil. So you have ABC in one, ABC in another, ABC in the other. And again, I'm not talking about the grounded conductor, and I'm not talking about anything else. I'm just trying to give you a visual here. So I have phase A, B, C, A, B, C, A, B, 5 sets, okay? Now, we're connecting those in parallel, so all the A's will end up being together at each end, all the B's will be together at each end, all the C's will be together at each end, right? Now, when you do that, you're running that circuit to equipment. They're all done in parallel, but if you're following the paralleling rules in 310.10G or H, depending on which cycle you're in, they act as one circuit conductor. Just because they're running parallel, when they come together at each end, they act as the circuit conductor. So I did get the code making panel to put that in their substantiation to make it clear. Okay, so that was one thing that I was going for, to make it clear. Now, the reason for that is, listen, it says right here, equipment grounding conductors shall not be required to be larger than the circuit conductors in the raceway or cable supplying the equipment. Okay, so their belief is this is talking about one raceway. This is talking about one cable. And so that's fine. If you have multiple parallel sets in a single raceway, since this is not plural, it just says raceway or cable, then you could have 5 sets in one raceway. Now, granted, it's probably not practical because once you start doing that, you have adjustment or corrections that have to take place. So we have adjustments because you probably have more than 3 current carrying conductors. And I guess you could have an ambient correction as well. But we're going to focus on the fact that it's just one raceway. Okay, so if that's the case, in the substantiation from the code panel, it made it clear that when you connect all those A phases together, all those B phases together, all those C phases together, that it acts as the circuit conductor. So in this case, it says the equipment ground never has to be larger than the circuit conductors in the raceway or cable. So in that case, if I had a single raceway with multiple phase conductors and they were connected in parallel, then the EGC never has to be larger than the summation of all of the ungrounded conductors from that phase. So if I had A, B, and C, so I had 3 sets in one raceway, then the EGC never has to be larger than the total summation or adding up the circular mills of all 3 of the ungrounded conductors in that one set. Okay? And we're just talking about one phase, A. Okay? I'll have people all the time that get this confused. We're only dealing with one phase when we're doing all this, guys. Just A phase or B phase or C. Not all of them. You don't add up the circular mills of all the A's, all the B's, and all the C's. Just one phase. Okay? Now, so clearly here, it never has to be larger. So if I had, let's just say I'm just using this number, even though it probably would not fit in the raceway. If I had 3 500s for A, 3 500s for B, and 3 500s for C, I'm just saying, just in a hypothetical argument here, then the maximum of circular mills would be 1,500,000. So that's 500 plus 500 plus 500. That would be 3 of the A's connected together at each end creates the circuit conductor, at least for phase A, right? And so the EGC would never have to be larger than 1,500,000 circular mills. That's when you're running it in a single raceway or cable, and that's what it says right here, point blank. All right, and also in the substantiation, just so I can show you that. Hopefully this will come out well. Down here in the substantiation, I'll let you see it, and it's not showing up very well. So hold on, let me try to adjust real quick so you can see it. And it's not gonna let me do it. So I'm gonna have to do this on the fly, folks. I apologize. This EVMux is not the best software in the world when it comes to this type of stuff. So bear with me, and I will try to break it down. Okay, so here's what it says right here. Now I want you to see here in the statement, it says 251.22a1 is promoted to 250.122a, and the title has been revised. Now it says the phrase "in the raceway or cable" is added to the remaining sentence to clarify that the circuit conductors are installed in parallel in a single raceway. The equipment grounding conductor is to be based on the rating of the overcurrent circuit protected device, okay, circuit breaker, let's say, or fuse, but does not have to be larger than the equivalent size of the sum of the individual phase conductors, okay? And it also says the parallel circuit conductors for multiple raceways or cables are sized based on 250.122f. Okay, so we're talking about parallel sets in a single raceway that you do take the summation of all of, let's say, phase A, if you're running parallels in a single raceway, and the EGC never has to be larger than that total summation, okay? Which means that the EGC could be larger than any of the single parallel ungrounded conductors in this single raceway, okay? So we just wanted to make clear, so even though it wasn't in the code, all my effort was, let's make that clear because there's so much confusion, but at least it's in the panel statement, okay? So that allows us to be able to point back and see what we're talking about there, okay? All right, so now let's go back and I'll have to resize the screen, folks, so bear with me. So now we're going back to the code language, and let me readjust here real quick, and I will get us back to the code language. And then we'll be back on track. All right, so here we go back to the code language. Right there. Okay, so what we've got is, again, so it's not larger than the circuit conductors. And again, made it very clear right here. This was the change to make it clear that they mean a single raceway. Okay? Anybody's confused on any of that, please pause, go back, rewatch. We're talking about one raceway with parallel sets in the one raceway. You would add up all of the, say, phase A, okay, or line 1 versus line 2, however, if you're doing single phase versus 3-phase. You add up all of the A's, and that is your total summation, and the EGC never has to be larger than that. But in this case, it could be larger than any of the phase conductors, okay, because you're doing a summation. That's just what we wanted to make clear. Now, this one, B, now says other than wire type. Okay, so this would be where you're using the raceways, the armor, or the cable tray. Okay. Now let's go on down to the change here. Now they say it was F, but again, this could be terrorizing it. I can't remember how we structured this because if it does, that means the public, our panel statement would have to change because this is now talking about H. But anyway. Same concept here. And you see that it is now broken down a little bit more. Now, here's what we want to focus on right here. So, if there are parallels and they're in a single raceway, okay, because remember before we were looking at the basically 250-122A, right? Let me scroll back up. We were looking at A, this one right here, right? All right. And we had that panel statement from the code panel that was talking about 251.22a, making it clear that we're talking about one raceway. But if there were parallel sets in there, you do the summation count. Covered that already, right? So the code panel made it clear on that. Okay. There's a reason I'm pointing all this out. So now let's come down here to the parallel application. So here is the same concept, but this is now saying single raceway. It says, if circuit conductors are connected in parallel in the same raceway, which is what we just talked about, okay? It says a single wire type conductor size in accordance with 250.122 based on the overcurrent protected device for the feeder or branch circuit shall be permitted as an equipment grounded conductor. So since this sends us back to 250.122, that's where it says what? That if I have 2 sets or 3 sets, that the EGC in a single raceway could conceivably be larger than any of the individual ungrounded conductors that are installed in parallel. All we were ever trying to say. And the code panel substantiation made that clear. Okay. Now, the rub that we have is where no data was submitted was right here in multiple raceways. So here's where the debate really started. And in this case, it says, if conductors are installed in multiple raceways and are connected in parallel, a wire type equipment grounded conductor, if used, because you don't have to, you can use the raceway, okay, shall be installed in each raceway, be connected in parallel, and comply with the following. All right, so first one I didn't have a rub with. It just says the equipment grounded conductor installed in each raceway shall be sized in accordance with 250.122 based on the rating of the overcurrent protected device for the feeder or branch circuit. Okay, we've done that, and I don't know how many of you for years have been familiar with us saying things like the EGC has to be full size in every raceway. And that's the way we've always done it, which could have resulted in the EGC being larger than any of the ungrounded conductors. And be honest with you, that could also take the place for motor applications. It's not uncommon, and that's pretty much how it's been promoted for years, right? And the reason for this is to ensure that the overcurrent protective device will clear. If I start paralleling things out, then if I have a fault in the one raceway and it has mutual contribution to that fault from both ends, then all I know is that the code says that I need to create a low impedance effective ground fault current path to clear that overcurrent device. Now, in the first draft, one of the task groups submitted said, you know what? It's logic. It never has to be larger than the ungrounded conductors. Okay, well, the problem with that is the ungrounded conductor has impedance in it. It has devices inserted into it, and those type of things. And the reality is the tripping may be different when it looks at the instantaneous versus the unlatching and whatever that takes place in your trip curve versus the assurance that the low impedance effective ground fault current path trips as fast as possible. In fact, Code Panel 5 is charged with making sure that we achieve a low impedance effective ground fault current path so that we don't install anything into the circuit that can reduce that. Now, just because the ungrounded conductors can clear an overcurrent device, the question for the committee was, we've been doing this for over 70 years. We've been sizing equipment grounds. It served us well. They clear overcurrent devices reliably. What data, other than you saying trust logic, just trust us? We don't need to give the panel any information. It's logical. It makes sense. And then to go and pretty much say in the meeting, and look, I'm not berating anybody. In the meeting, they said that Mr. Soares or anybody that's been in the early days of groundbreaking research on equipment grounds, they said that they're all wrong, that this should have been changed years ago. Maybe this is true. I haven't done the research. All I can tell you is, without a doubt, zero research was submitted for this change. Zero. So where's the problem? Okay, if you haven't read my article on the problem, go read it. It's one of my blogs. And you know what? In all fairness, they may be correct. They might say that, look, you can't put 10 pounds of crap in a 5-pound bag. They might say that the ungrounded conductors can clear a short circuit. So again, should have no problem. The problem I have is that we're charged with making sure that the equipment ground is a low impedance effective ground fault current path. By reducing the size of it, we're increasing the impedance by just reducing the potential size of the equipment ground. I already have a problem with that, okay? And we are relying on it to clear an overcurrent device. I'll give you an example here in a minute. All right, so all that taking place. So now let's look and see what was said. And of course, they said that I have to follow logic. Okay. So as we look here, let's talk about this one. So item number 2. Okay. Now, again, I don't know if this structure is exactly how it's going to look in the end, because sometimes Terra will screw things up. And it's a great software, by the way. It allows you to be able to interact and put stuff in. So I'm not belittling the software. I think it's great. It allows you to really work on the code in real time and see things. But sometimes it can screw things up. But it's not bad. Okay. All right, I think it gets a bad rap, but sometimes it just does mess some things up. All right, so here's what it says right here. It says the equipment grounding conductor in each raceway, so we're talking parallels now, each raceway shall not be required to be larger than the largest ungrounded conductor in the raceway. Again, my only rub with this was, okay, so if I have a 4,000 amp service, or 3,000 amp service. And I go down here, and I'll just show you. I go down here, and here's the 3,000 amps. And copper, it's saying that it needs to be a 400 for a 3,000 amp service. Okay? And so let's say that I parallel it out enough, okay, where my equipment ground, my ungrounded conductors end up being something as small as a 250 kc mill. And I have a number of sets. So in this case, they're saying, look, if I have a fault in that one raceway, the 250 kc mill ungrounded conductor can clear the 3000 amp overcurrent protected device, when for years we've said that it needs to be a 400 kc mill to do it reliably. But out of the blue, and let's try not to confuse the short circuit currents and all with trying to achieve a low impedance effective ground fault current path, and why we've been doing this for over 70 years. If you bring me data, I'll buy into it. I'll like, oh, this makes sense. Just show me some data. And the problem I have with it is some of the people on the committee were saying, we have data, but now I asked for it in the first draft. We never saw it. I've now asked for it in the second draft. We never saw it. So this is a problem with code making panels. When you have a room of individuals who may not have an expertise in certain things, don't want to chime up on certain issues because maybe somebody is speaking that is very knowledgeable and says, just trust me. That is a problem with code making panels. And that is a problem with long-standing members who generate what we call tenure or seniority, or they're very much leaders. No, nothing wrong with that. But what happens is everybody just takes what they say as gospel. And we're not supposed to change the NEC unless we get substantiated data. I don't like manufacturers changing something that they just say, believe me, trust me. I don't like it. I don't like it at all. This is an example where I'm sitting there going, dude, I'm on board. I'll teach it. But you gotta show me substantiation for why you want to change something, to turn around and say, well, the problem is that you're telling me that a 250 kc mill is now going to do the work in that individual raceway as a 400, and then have them all say, yes, this makes logic, this is common sense, that Mr. Soares has been wrong for 70 years, that everybody's been wrong, and all of a sudden they have an epiphany and they're right, and then say it's logic, but don't put it in writing. That's a problem that I have, right? So I'll buy into it, but you're going to have to convince me, okay? Because I know how important an equipment ground conductor is to the safety circuit, and you're now just reducing it, okay? So again, you could play this all the way up and down the table, and you can see how that would work out. So that's basically what's changed in that, okay? So if I have a circuit and I parallel it out 5 or 6 times, right? In that scenario, then the equipment grounding conductor is going to get smaller and smaller and smaller. And when it gets smaller and smaller and smaller, because it doesn't have to be larger than the largest ungrounded conductor in the raceway, then what happens is the impedance goes up, 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 up. Now, people will also say at that point, well, Paul, if you have a fault to the ground path, the equipment ground, then it's going to travel in both ways. Well, it's going to travel differently because the impedance in the effective ground fault current path is going to be different than that of the ungrounded conductor's path, okay? Because there is impedance in other devices that are inserted into it. One of the things that I thought was kind of funny during the argument was one of the questions that was brought up was that we'll do things differently on supply side bonding jumpers and everything, and sizing and all this kind of stuff. And these are very intelligent people, but one of the gentlemen said, what does it matter if we insert an overcurrent protected device into the circuit? Well, it matters a hell of a lot, because on supply side bonding and all that type of stuff, you're not trying to clear an overcurrent device. You're just bonding everything, putting it to the same potential, okay? We can't control upstream what trips on the utility side. As it said, we're trying to control from the feeder and branch circuit side. So what's the difference? The difference is we're trying to clear an overcurrent protected device as quickly as possible. Now, depending on the length of the circuit, what you could have is these long lengths. You could have voltage drop, which is not taken into account. You could have a situation where the impedance rises to the point where it doesn't operate in the instantaneous portion. You could have other issues as consequences. But voltage drop is not a requirement in the code for the most part. It is for fire pumps, it is for sensitive electronic equipment, but other places it's not. So when we're charged as a code panel to maintain an effective ground fault current path, and you choose to reduce the size of an equipment grounding conductor without any data because you say that it's logical, or it's common sense, or it's just physics, you got to be careful because there are other things involved in the analysis. There's devices that raises impedance, right? There is the fact that you increase the impedance on the equipment grounding conductor, okay? Because you're reducing its size. And all of the equipment grounds are run the same way, okay? Following the parallel installations, even though they're not being used the same way as grounded conductors and ungrounded conductors in 310.10 when it comes to paralleling. It's not the same, for the same reason. It's just telling us to install them similar. Now, the question is, when we install all of our phase conductors for A, we have to follow all of the characteristics. Same length, same conductive material, those type of things. For current to divide evenly, right? When we do not necessarily, we can have aluminum conductors that are for the parallel sets, but we have copper equipment grounding conductors. And so the logic that they say that the ground fault, that the conductors never have to be larger than the largest ungrounded conductor, which may be aluminum, and we may have a GEC that's copper. Yes, they can be in the same raceway, okay? So at the end of the day, the impedances will be different, and the overcurrent device has to operate. And so to say to me that it doesn't make any difference if we inject an overcurrent protected device in the circuit, they're apples to oranges. But the real issue for me is, and I'm going to teach this because this is what they're going to go with. I get it, but I disagree with it, and I sure hope that nobody gets hurt. I sure hope that the overcurrent protected devices function properly without any testing being done to change the sizes and those type of things. Look, they made it very clear that if it's a single raceway and you had parallel sets, okay, in the single raceway, that you add up the summation, which could result in an equipment ground being larger than any one of the ungrounded conductors. However, you put them out in parallel, and in that raceway where you could have a fault in that single raceway, and it has to clear that overcurrent protected device, you're allowed to reduce the size of the equipment grounding conductor in hope that it clears the device. Think about that for a second. I'm just saying. All right, folks, that's my opinion. Again, you can agree to disagree. That's okay. That's okay. You could say, Paul, you're totally wrong. I want to see the data. And if you got the data, please send it to me. Send it. paul.abernathy@fasttracksystem.com. I'm more than happy to read your data. But until then, I think probably Mr. Soares got it right. Until next time, stay safe and God bless.